Our health, harmony, happiness, humor, and humanity. And today's show is all about health. Specifically, we're going to talk about the safety and efficacy of vaccines and what should be involved with informed consent. And I have four very special guests that I'd like to thank immensely for taking the time to come in today. They're highly credentialed, and I'm going to introduce them. And we also have Amy, my co-host, who's going to be videoing the show. Thank you, Amy. And I'll start in alphabetical order here. Dr. Larry Constantine is a pediatrician who received his medical degree from the State University of New York in 1979. He's written several publications related to pediatrics. He's done extensive research related to immunology and is a member of several health organizations and is a fellow at the American Academy of Pediatrics. Alison Despathy lives in the Northeast Kingdom with her family. She has a Master's of Science in Human Nutrition from the University of Bridgeport and has a clinical nutrition practice in St. Johnsbury. Alison's taught nutrition and biology courses in the Vermont State College system for 25 years. A strong advocate for informed consent and health choice, she's written many articles that have been published throughout the state to help raise awareness and ensure health choice for all Vermonters. Dr. Celeste Madden graduated magna cum laude from Smith College with a degree in biology and has also received her medical degree from the State University of New York. She's board certified in pediatrics, has a long list of awards and honors to include the Pediatric House Staff Teaching Award at Golisano Children's Hospital. I hope I pronounced that right.
That's right.
And she was awarded that twice, which I think is pretty special. And Dr. Sandy Ryder graduated from Harvard Medical School in 1971. He completed his medical internship at the Medical Center Hospital of Vermont. For the last 30 years, he's maintained a private medical practice in northern Vermont with a particular emphasis on nutrition and classical homeopathy. He serves as a medical advisor to the Vermont Coalition for Vaccine Choice and is a founding member of Physicians for Informed Consent. And thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. And I'd like to start with maybe each of you taking a minute or two to explain why you wanted to participate in this conversation. So do you want to start, Sandy?
Sure. Does this work? Like
That's perfect.
Okay, so first of all, thank you, Geri and Amy, for organizing this, and Larry and Celeste for being willing to come in. I know we're going to probably present different opinions about things, but I hope it's all in cordial good faith that we're able to listen to each other. My interest in doing this, and I've been involved in kind of in a deep way with Health Choice Vermont for the last 13 years. And before that, as a parent, when I had to decide whether or not to vaccinate my son. And I decided back in 1981 not to. That was before internet and computers, so I had to do a lot of hard work in the library in Burlington. And my reason for wanting to do this today is to just ask for people to listen to both sides, to all sides of this question, and instead of just believing in things, to really think about things and look at the facts. So that's my reason for being here.
Thanks, Sandy. Allison, do you want to?
Sure, yes. Thank you so much for making this happen, Geri and Amy. And Larry and Celeste, it's so nice to meet you. It's so nice to be here. And I would just say I'm coming in essentially with three different hats on. And one is as a parent. I have a 22-year-old and a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old. And care deeply, obviously, about them like all parents do. And I'm also a teacher at Vermont State Colleges, as Geri had mentioned, and I have a clinical nutrition practice. And in my practice, I've seen vaccine injury, and just like Sandy had said, I did a lot of research and dove in when my children were born to really try to determine what was the best path. Did vaccinations make sense for them? Were they safe? Were they effective? So asking all the questions that parents do. And then the other piece that I just hope for, I'm so grateful to have this conversation. I feel like us in our communities having these real conversations and being honest and transparent is the most important thing we can do right now. So many people are siloed in communities and online, and I think for us to get this all on the table and talk about it, and really my hope is that people can just get all the information they can so they can make informed health decisions for themselves and their families, and that's my goal.
Thank you, Allison. And Larry, would you like to?
Yes, we come about this from a slightly different perspective. We have been amidst in an academic medical center world and have followed the science as we have heard it and have been taught to us. And now we are in a community where there's a lot of different opinions. We think historically this came about during COVID, or at least exploded during COVID. But we see the potential for harm as well as the potential for benefit. And the key, as we both feel, is just exactly what's going on now. Let's just talk about it. And I'll explain to you where my thinking is coming from, what has given rise to how I believe best practice is practiced. And you can agree or not agree. That's sort of the way this is going. So that's our goal. And I am a little nervous, honestly, because I know I'm going to be asked hard questions. And I think that's a good thing, and just parenthetically, Celeste and I did homework over these last week or two. You know what, I don't know if you did this or remember doing this, but there's something called a literature search. We would, in healthcare, we would have a topic or a problem present itself. We would go through the literature as all the medical journals, the history of medical journals, and we'd have to figure out what the best answer is. And that's what we were doing for this.
Great, thank you, Larry. And Celeste? If you can just go close to the microphone so everybody can.
Hello, I'm here, I think, as a practicing physician and trying to help people based on my experiences with my pediatric practice for over 35 years. I'm also here as since I retired in 2017, as a community member, being asked questions frequently about things such as what we're going to discuss today, and wanting to be well informed and listen to people's questions and try to respond in the best way I can. My ultimate goal, being a pediatrician and taking care of my friends and family and offering advice, is really just to be fair, honest about healthcare issues, and to try to get to the best possible solution to have people be the most healthy that they can be.
Thanks, Celeste. Okay, on that note, I'm going to dive into our questions. What I'm going to do is ask a series of questions, and Larry and Sandy will each have 10 minutes, and Celeste and Allison can intervene as you guys all see fit. So Sandy, we're going to start with you. The first question is, what are your thoughts about claims by the CDC that vaccines are safe and effective?
Sorry, little mic problem here. Okay, thanks, Jerry. We hear that safe and effective meme repeated over and over and over again for every single vaccine on the schedule. And it's like, I was trained that way. I know Larry and Celeste probably were too. Almost all physicians are trained that vaccines are safe and effective. And back when I was in medical school, there were only 3. Now there are many more. We'll go over that later. So again, my plea is for people to look at the data and not just follow the vaccine safe and effective message out of some kind of ideology or belief. It's no doubt that COVID lit the fuse for this discussion, as Larry mentioned already. I do believe that. And with the many abuses of the COVID era, they were neither safe, much excess mortality and numerous injuries, or effective. We know that the vaccine not only did not prevent infection or transmission, they had a negative efficacy where people who were more vaccinated with usually the Pfizer, sometimes the Moderna vaccine, were more likely to get COVID and more likely to transmit it. So if we just listen to the public health messaging, it was frankly a lie. So we need to be able to examine the data on our own and not depend wholly on the narrative coming from our public health agencies. Because time is so limited, I had planned to go over some of the clinical studies in the post-licensure period, and all these data from this clinical experience is included in each package insert for each vaccine. And I'll go over that later, as the importance of looking at the package insert to really be informed. But because time is short, and because an announcement just came out in the last day or two stating on the CDC website that we don't really know if vaccines cause autism or not. The wording on the CDC website now still states that vaccines do not cause autism, with a footnote saying the evidence can neither confirm nor deny that association. So this is a huge, huge admission on the part of the CDC. And I'd like to, if I can be brief, and if I get over 5 minutes, please tell me, Amy, I'd like to explain how that particular conclusion was arrived at. And in my opinion, it was arrived at by litigation from an attorney named Aaron Siri, who is a very experienced vaccine injury lawyer. And the story goes like this. After the National Childhood Injury Vaccine Program was instituted or passed in 1986, that act asked the HHS, Health and Human Services, to ascertain 11 questions, one of which was the commonest questions that parents claimed hurt their children, one of which was, do vaccines cause autism? And the Institute of Medicine was assigned to explore this question and came up with exactly nothing. There was no evidence either way to confirm or deny that autism was a result of vaccines. So the question was left open. Often what we hear is that, well, there's no evidence to confirm this, therefore the vaccines are safe. But the fact is that there's no evidence for or against. Again, in 2012, this was a couple of years after the omnibus autism program, where they looked at claims that vaccines had caused autism from 5,500 parents. And again, the HHS hired the Institute of Medicine to determine whether or not vaccines caused autism. And using autism in this, autism is probably the most widely claimed injury that is denied by public health on the basis of mountains and mountains of evidence and well-controlled studies. Well, the 2012 panel that was convened with multiple experts was unable to come up with any data that confirmed or denied that vaccines, either individually or as a group, caused autism. So that's 2 times in a row that that's been determined that they had no information. And Aaron Siri, the lawyer, decided, well, let's just go to the source and ask the CDC, who is responsible for post-licensure vaccine safety studies. And so he invoking the Freedom of Information Act, he FOIA'd the CDC for the question, do vaccines cause autism? In particular, does the pertussis vaccine cause autism? Okay, I got the 5-minute mark. And
6.
Long story short, they could come up with nothing, and actually gave Aaron 20 studies, none of which were relevant to the question he asked, which was about vaccines in the first 6 months of life. So that's the state of the science. CDC signed off on that. They admitted it, even though they didn't want to, and that's, I think, the origin of the statement that we've all read in the last couple of days. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandy. And just adding to that, I think I'm coming in from a very different space with having a master's.
This is Allison.
Oh yes, sorry, thank you, Allison Descatti, yes. So with my Master's of Science in Human Nutrition, one of the things that we learn about is the FDA approval process. And I think it's important because for me this is a really big trust issue, and the fact that I have definitely lost trust with the FDA approval process. And this is where when you go back to when you look at conflicts of interest, revolving door policies, you look at the fact that 10 out of the past 11 FDA commissioners have gone and worked at pharmaceutical industries, and there's been uproar from Congress about this. But to me, this is really at a foundation of the problem, because it is, who do you trust? And this is also where I've landed with regards to when my children were born and I was diving down this hole of, am I going to vaccinate? Then I ended up really looking at, okay, what are the studies around this? What can I find? And this has led me then to start on the very first day of life. Typically, a newborn baby is given a hepatitis B vaccine. And this shocked me so much when I then looked at the package insert for hepatitis B, and I learned that this vaccine was only studied in 147 children up to the age of 10, not even all infants, for 5 days of safety monitoring. And I think enough said. We have no idea what that is doing to a child in the long term, in the short term. That's not a power study. We have such a small control group and we have no safety monitoring. And this is what has led me to say, absolutely no, I am not going to go down this road. There's no way that we know that these are safe or effective. The other thing I want to say is the other reason that I am very strongly opposed I respect people's choice, but very strongly opposed to this is when you look at how much money has been paid out by the vaccine court for vaccine injury. And the Vaccine Compensation and Injury Program has paid out at this point for families, for children who have been injured or killed, $5.5 billion. So to say that these are safe and effective, I think we really need to step back, and we need to not go on beliefs or ideology, as Dr. Ryder said. We need to really look at the science and look at what do we know about safety and efficacy. And that's where I've landed and why this conversation is so important.
Thank you, Allison.
Perfect.
You have another minute?
Yeah, 1 minute.
Do you, anything else either one of you want to say?
Go ahead.
I would just say, that microphone again, that speaking of hepatitis B vaccine, one of the questions that I wasn't able to address in the first 5 minutes was, are these vaccines not only safe and effective, but are they necessary? Hepatitis B vaccine is up for review by the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices in December, so that's coming right up. My guess is they should remove it from the schedule. It's not a necessary vaccine, but they'll probably not recommend vaccinating 12-hour-old babies, but delaying it until 4 months. I'm guessing that's what they're going to do. Also, just around the necessity issue, there's never been a case of transmission of hepatitis B among school children in any state in the entire country. So
That's it. Yeah.
that should be clear to everyone. It's not really a necessary vaccine. Thank you.
Okay, and I'm going to ask the same question. What are your thoughts about the claims by the CDC that vaccines are safe and effective, to Larry and Celeste?
So, thank you. So I'm going to answer this question in a slightly different manner. Claims, first of all, presumes that there's some issue. I would rephrase that as recommendations. So where does the CDC come, or the group that advises on immunization policy, where do they get their information to make a recommendation? So it comes from a very long, multi-year process in the development of vaccines. So let's say we start with the recognition by some scientists that there's a particular way that a virus or a bacteria gets into our cells and makes us sick. So we would like to prevent that from happening. So they begin the process of saying, how can we direct our immune system? Not necessarily to kill the whole germ, but to just attack that one small part of it. So they begin by saying, okay, let's figure out if indeed that's the way it causes injury to cells. Now that's a process of lots of experimentation in the laboratories, multiple research papers, presentation and research meetings where there's hundreds of people in the audience who are asking hard questions. From that, they may then begin to develop an idea that, okay, we can potentially help an organism, an animal, say, begin to get immune to this germ by just focusing on this thing. So then they begin animal studies. And they will do, say, inject some of this material that they're thinking might be a good way to start an immune process into animals. And they'll look for two things. They'll first say, okay, what are the antibodies? How does our immune system actually respond to this germ? How do we get rid of it? And that's by measuring the immunity. So one thing they'll do is they'll look and see whether the animal develops that immunity. The next thing they'll do is to say, okay, well, they've got that evidence of immunity, but does it really prevent infection? So the next thing they'll do is do research looking at whether or not those animals are now resistant to that particular germ. And I'll just want to give you a little bit of a historical background. Smallpox in the 18th century killed hundreds of thousands of people a year. This one guy, Edward Jenner, in the late 18th century, discovered that women who took care of cows, milkmaids, got a disease called cowpox. That was a virus which he knew was very similar or caused very similar symptoms to smallpox. And he noted that those women who got cowpox didn't get smallpox. So he said, maybe cowpox can prevent smallpox. And what he did is he then gave cowpox to some kids and exposed them to smallpox. Now, we wouldn't do that now, but as a result, those kids did not get smallpox. And it was a miracle. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people were dying. And all of a sudden, by giving smallpox vaccinations, they were saved, or they did not get sick. So that's the early part of the process. But the next phase is to say, okay, now we've got this material that we know in animals causes immunity, the right kind of immunity, it prevents them from getting infections. What about, can we do this in people? Before they go there, then they've got to go to the FDA. Now, I don't know about what the FDA is, I don't know who the people are, but I do know that in order for them to go to that next phase, they've got to demonstrate that there's a relative safety, at least amongst the first stage of this. And they'll do it with a very small number of people. It'll be very carefully monitored. It'll be always with a placebo. In other words, they'll give one group the new vaccine, another group potentially saline or something else, and they'll see if one develops the immunity. And again, two things they're looking for. One is immunity. In other words, do they develop the right type of antibodies that would potentially prevent them from getting sick? And number two, if they are exposed to the illness, the germ, do they not get sick? Or do they get less sick? Or do they get sick in fewer numbers? And it's a whole range, right? It's not just will they never get it, but does it give better results when exposed to the germ? So that's only the first phase. And it's reviewed not by me going to the library. This is reviewed by hundreds of researchers, looking at hundreds of research papers, being people looking over their shoulders, some of whom are out to get them. They're competitors. So who knows what's going on? But this is all funded by money from the federal government. It's not funded by the pharmaceutical industry. This is research grants to universities and medical centers. Only then do they move on to larger studies, again, placebo-controlled. In other words, one gets nothing, the other gets a real thing, and neither the patient nor the doctor knows who's getting which. Okay, it's called double blinding. So nobody knows what's being given, and then they do that same thing. A few more, maybe it's a couple of hundred patients, but a few more patients. That's only the second phase. And then they move into a third phase, which is where they're looking at the manufacturing of it, the safety of the containers. Where do you have to keep it? How long do you keep it in the refrigerator? How long can you keep it out? All these different things. And they look at everything that was added to that vaccine that may have made that vaccine more effective. In other words, gotten a more vigorous response on the part of the patient. And make sure that's part of the safety process. Okay, so that's just rolling it out. Multiple years, hundreds of doctors, thousands of papers, okay? Now, I can't imagine how that's a cabal, how that's a bunch of people getting together and say, okay, let's do this, and I don't care if it doesn't work, there's too many checks and balances over too many levels, over too long a time for me to really think that could be. So then, the safety monitoring. There's something called Vaccine Adverse Event reporting system, VAERS. And this is a system where if you think there's an adverse event associated with a vaccine, you report it. You, anybody, okay? Not just a doctor, not just a researcher, anybody. And then once that data is in there, it could be I got a vaccine and then I went in my car and I got into a car crash and I died. They can put that in there. So that's a death associated with a vaccine. But somebody has to look at those data and say, yeah, but. And the careful analysis of that data is necessary. And if they identify a potential safety flag, red flag, then they start doing more research into it. And that's not just that, but there's several other mechanisms by which, once the vaccine is out in public, it's also being continuously monitored, and every sign that it could potentially be causing an adverse event is identified. And I just put some numbers up. So one of the things, COVID as an example, okay? So we've heard potentially that COVID caused more deaths than from the vaccine.
Could I ask you one question? I know I'm going out of line here, but the process that you just explained about how vaccines are developed and all the years of, was that true with the COVID vaccine?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
Go ahead.
So in part, I understand why you're asking the question. There's COVID vaccine development was different in a way that was required or demanded by the disease process and the mortality that we were seeing with COVID infections. So that it was really a supercharged in terms of the time frame of the study. So a number of the studies which would have been done sequentially were actually done at the same time. And so it was different in that way. But the foundation for the vaccines, the mechanism of inducing immunity, those had been studied previously. So the mRNA vaccine immunity had been studied previously, and there were other mechanisms of inducing immunity that had already previously been studied.
You still have
Thank
a
you.
minute at least.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So there was, in the United States, it's been estimated that the vaccine prevented 3.2 million deaths and 18 million hospitalizations. Now, if the presumption is that the vaccine caused at least that many deaths, these are unvaccinated people who die. So if the presumption is that the vaccine caused that many deaths, I don't think you can hide 3.2 million deaths. I mean, where would the 3.2 million deaths be that weren't identified? So anyway, I think there's a lot of data from a lot of different sources that seem to be saying the same thing. And one last thing, when I look at a research paper, I know I am not a good person to analyze the quality of that research. You know why? Because I'm not a statistician, because I don't know how the differences in groups make a difference in the results. It's really hard. So what I do is I defer to people who do that. Not just one guy, not just somebody on the internet, but to research institutions who've been doing this for years and have been confirmed by multiple people.
Okay, thank you, Larry. That was Larry, and for my second question, I'll start with you guys, if that's okay. What do you think of the childhood vaccine schedule and the requirement for children to be vaccinated in order to attend school? Larry and Celeste?
Sure. So I think I'll go first.
Thanks,
Having
Celeste.
had the probably more experience with using the vaccine schedule from the CDC. So I think that as a pediatrician, I think that the vaccine schedule from the CDC has always been a valuable tool for us to use, to follow, to help us to keep children vaccinated and safe from certain infectious diseases. I feel confident in the schedule, in how it was developed and how it continues to be surveilled, to adjust it, to make changes, to add vaccines or take away vaccines, or to change the timing of the injections of the vaccines. I believe that the safety systems that Larry alluded to are a part and parcel of why I have confidence in the schedule. And those safety systems, which are ongoing. And I think I just want to make a comment about the vaccine inserts and the comments that have been made that adverse effects are only followed for a 7-day period or a 6-day period. That is misleading in the sense that when we have the safety monitoring that occurs, not just the VAERS system, but above and beyond the VAERS system, that can follow what are potential signals of injury and try to then look at populations and rates of infection or complications in those populations, that we have information that will allow us to guide our families to use vaccines in a safe way. I would like to mention the hepatitis B vaccination, that Sandy previously mentioned. I think it's important to understand that the hepatitis B vaccination, the birth dose, is there for a purpose. It's there because the greatest vulnerability of being exposed, when you're exposed to hepatitis B, to go on and develop chronic disease with chronic hepatitis B and liver disease, occurs in the immediate newborn period. So if you're exposed to hepatitis B virus at that time period, you have infants who are exposed in that time period have about a 90% chance of going on and developing chronic hepatitis B, which is associated with liver failure and cases of cancer, liver cancer. So that's why that particular window was chosen, and I do think it would be a detriment to children's health to delay that vaccination and to change the schedule from what it is today, but offering and recommending a birth dose of hepatitis B.
School?
School, school, let's see. So school mandates. I started out in my introduction by saying that my goal is to keep the largest number of the population as healthy as possible. I do support school mandates. I think it's important because over time what we've learned is that school mandates keep the most people healthy and safe from the morbidities of vaccine preventable diseases and the mortality, obviously. So I do support those. I realize that it's an ethically complicated question and situation, and I think that one should have, a parent should have the ability to decide whether they want to get their child vaccinated. However, I think that the moral impact comes in when one then has the possibility of that decision. And I think this is an obvious example that people have used. But the fear is that children who are unvaccinated will contract the disease and expose people who cannot be vaccinated, don't have that choice to protect themselves. So that I do support the childhood vaccine mandates for school in order to protect those who can't be protected.
Thank you.
One last
Celeste.
comment, could I just finish
Yeah,
about
you
just
have
the schedule?
3 more minutes, I believe.
Yeah, 4.
4 minutes.
So the schedule concept, like can you,
Microphone.
oh, sorry.
Yeah.
The schedule concept. So that's it,
And this is Larry.
yeah, so schedule concept. So how does one decide, or how did an organization, or how did a group of researchers decide on that particular schedule, and can it be modified randomly or just by choice? It has to do, for instance, in the first year of life, what's one of the things that's happening is early on, mother, all the resistance, all the antibodies that mom had were transferred to the baby. Now that resistance helped protect the baby to a certain extent, not completely, and certainly won't protect the baby against an illness that mom has never developed any immunity to, but it certainly can protect the baby. The development of the immune system in the first year is pretty active, so that in order to decide when the best time to give the vaccine is, you've got to understand several factors. When is the baby most susceptible to that particular illness? When is the mom's antibody not going to interfere with the vaccine? And when is that baby, during that first year of life, likely to be exposed to that illness that the vaccine is going to protect them against? So when they come up with a schedule, that work has already been done. And it's not like, oh yes, sort of, I would like to give it next week or next month or next year. It doesn't have the same benefit. And I feel the hepatitis thing, we used to think that hepatitis B could only be transferred through blood and blood products or sexual activity. And we have since recognized that it can be also transferred by something called fomites, like saliva and things like that. So it is transferable. We also know that women are generally tested for hepatitis B during their pregnancy, generally, but not always. Now, what?
I wanted to ask you a question, but I
Okay,
can't
go
because
ahead.
you're out of
All
time.
right, I can stop.
Sorry about that.
2 minutes left.
Okay,
Yes,
2
2
minutes.
minutes.
Okay, go ahead.
No, yes.
I was just wondering why.
Why what?
Why they wouldn't test if.
Because they didn't show up for care, because they couldn't get a good OB, because they started late, because they went to somebody who didn't know it was supposed to be done, because they got hepatitis after they got tested. There's a zillion reasons.
Yeah, well, not a zillion, but
Well,
there are several very important reasons, and particularly with our healthcare system in the United States and maternal health in particular. There are limitations to availability and access to services that we see in the United States that we might not see in some other countries.
Okay.
So that's why.
All right, thank you, Celeste. Thanks, Larry. Okay, and Sandy and Allison, same question. What do you think of the childhood vaccine schedule and the requirement for children to be vaccinated in order to attend school?
Just a couple of quick comments. This is not meant to be a debate, but I feel like I have to just say a few things. Larry mentioned how the safety trials for vaccines are always conductive of the placebo, but if you look at the package inserts, not one single vaccine in the schedule has ever been subjected to placebo trials, ever. So that's one point.
Just so you know, that
I'm sorry, it's my turn
it's
to
not
talk,
based on
Larry,
science.
sorry.
Okay.
I'm just,
Thank
I
you.
know we
Go
can
ahead.
agree to disagree, but the
I'm sorry.
science, that it's been
Please go.
litigated, it's the way it is.
Mhm.
And in terms of hepatitis B, it's true that women who are pregnant don't seek care, they're not screened. But the vast majority of children who are in Vermont, let's say, have mothers who have been screened for hepatitis and are at no risk for hepatitis B and therefore don't need the vaccine. Anyway, I'll just leave it there. In terms of the childhood schedule, as you know, when I was a kid, I just had, I think, the DPT vaccine, the whole cell pertussis vaccine, and a smallpox vaccine. By the 1980s, they had added an MMR, measles, mumps, rubella vaccine to the schedule. So there was actually 3 vaccines with 7 antigens given, but the MMR wasn't given until the first year of life up to 18 months. So not given early in infancy up to 6 months. When the 1986 Act removed liability for vaccine injury from the drug companies, the obligation, responsibility to protect children was transferred from the drug companies, who no longer had to worry about being sued, to the government. And now you have to sue the government, who then protects the product and the industry against the parents. It's kind of things turned upside down. Also, after this liability was removed, the vaccine schedule literally exploded, as did the incidence of chronic disease, which at last recording was up to 57% or 54 to 57% of children now have a chronic disease, where back in 1970 and 80 it was about 18%. So it's clear that something is going on that's making our children much sicker. Yes, the whole safety issue becomes even more important with this explosion in the schedule. The best way to sort this out, it sounds very complicated with all these experts and studies. It's confusing for parents, for sure. But the way around this is to simply have a study comparing unvaccinated children to vaccinated children. And the health agencies have already said they would never do that study because it's unethical. Once it's licensed, it would be unethical to do the study. However, there exist quite a few unvaccinated versus vaccinated studies already that have been performed, and Robert F. Kennedy and Brian Hooker published a book several years ago called Vaxxed versus Unvaxxed, where they found, I think, almost 80 studies which are small and not the greatest quality, but all mostly showing the same thing, that unvaccinated children had a much lower incidence of chronic illnesses ranging from autism, neurodevelopmental disorders, asthma, eczema, allergic things, autoimmune disease, and so on, and death. However, in 2017, Aaron Seary, the same lawyer that I mentioned before, and the Informed Consent Action Network, Del Bigtree, approached a lead investigator in the Henry Ford Health System, which is a huge system with, I think, 450 million patient visits a year. It was very large, and they had a lot of data. And Dr. Zerbos, who was the lead investigator for this particular time, actually agreed to do a vaccinated versus unvaccinated study with the data they already had in hand. Because he was quite sure, being a very pro-vaccine investigator, he was quite sure that it would reassure parents and decrease the whole thing about vaccine. Was that a bill?
5 minutes. 5 minutes.
About
5
vaccine hesitancy, which has become a big issue for people. What it found was actually the opposite. It found that 53% of the children had chronic disease versus 18% in the unvaccinated cohort, and that included neurodevelopmental delays, asthma, eczema, allergic diseases, autoimmune diseases, and some things they couldn't calculate at all because there were 0 incidents in the unvaccinated cohort. So that is probably the best data we have right now, and it's undoubtedly going to receive more study. So I'll just leave it at that.
Allison, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, thank you, and thanks, Sandy. So just a few things, and I just want to reiterate a few of the things that Sandy had said. I think it's incredibly important for people to note that there are 0 placebo-controlled inert clinical research trials on the childhood vaccine schedule. 0. They have all either been compared to an adjuvant, where they would use aluminum instead of a placebo, or they have been compared to other vaccines. So I think that's important for people to recognize. We do not have that type of inert placebo-controlled clinical trials on any of the childhood vaccines on the schedule, period. The other thing that I think is really important to reiterate and to keep in mind is, why do we have the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Program? So we had, back before 1986, we had diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus vaccines that were causing massive neurological damage. Massive. These parents and families were suing all of the vaccine manufacturers. They were going out of business, and there was one left called Ladural. In order to protect Ladural, because we wanted to make sure that the vaccine manufacturers can continue to make vaccines, Ronald Reagan in 1986 passed the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Program, which completely removed any liability or responsibility from vaccine manufacturers. Now keep in mind, there is no other product that exists that has that type of a liability shield. Now think about who's making the vaccine products. You've got corporations who are serial felons. They have been convicted for fraud, for money laundering, for altering clinical trials and research. They are felons. They are making products, and their primary goal is to promote profit for their shareholders. They have no financial incentive at all to do any pre-licensure vaccine safety monitoring. So when you start to look at vaccine, we talked about Hep B has 5 days of safety review. HIB has 3 days of safety review. DTaP has 28 days of safety review. These are for products that vaccine manufacturers are not liable for. Now let's look at Pfizer's top 5 selling drugs. You've got Enbrel. It has had 6.6 years of safety review and a control using a placebo. You've got Eliquis, 7.4 years of safety review and a control using a placebo. Lipitor, 4.9 years with a placebo control. These companies are responsible for the safety of those products, but not for the vaccines. This is again back to a trust issue. And then I would also add into the mix, if we want to talk about the COVID piece, J&J has been pulled from the market because of a clotting disorder. We were told that was safe and effective. It is not safe and effective. We can go and we can look in 2000 at Simpsonwood, where the regulators and the pharmaceutical industry and research scientists met, and they said, yes, look at this, mercury is causing neurological damage. Mercury was slowly pulled from these childhood vaccines after that. There was no attempt to make parents and providers aware that they were doing this. They had to pull mercury because of the neurological damage. And I want to also comment at this point that I have all source documents on everything that I am saying here that I can share with Larry and Celeste, and I hope that they can take the time to read this. I know that we all care deeply for people and we want to see people healthy. Any of us wouldn't have gone into healthcare if that was not the case. But these are realities that people need to be aware of. We need to know that these companies are not liable for their products. We need to know that none of the vaccine clinical trials have had any placebo controls.
Thank you, Allison. Okay, my third question will go to Sandy first. What sources do you rely on for information regarding vaccines?
Oops, this microphone keeps going.
Sandy, you have 10
Oh, whoops.
minutes, and for
All
you
right.
and Allison to
Um,
share.
Well, that's a good question. Back when I was coming out of medical school at Harvard, no less, my chief source of information was the New England Journal of Medicine, which is a preeminent medical journal, and the other well-respected medical journals. Since then, it's been harder and harder to trust information. The former editor of the journal, I think for 13 years, Marcel Angel, said the same, that she could, as editor of the journal, that they could no longer trust what was being published because at least half of them were ghost-written, just not good studies. And Richard Horton in Lancet, which is another preeminent medical journal, said the same thing at about the same time for journals being published over in the Lancet. I'd say my main source of good information comes from my patients, actually. You know, I've been practicing, now, for 54 years, talked to a lot of people, and I've known early on that most diagnoses are made by taking a good history with people. And I've learned also that you can mostly trust what they say, and particularly when they're saying that a vaccine injured my child, or I had a side effect from this drug, or had a bad experience here. I trust what they say. So they've become probably my greatest teachers. Also, has emerged since the computer age a lot of independent studies by good researchers that aren't affiliated with the drug companies or with the CDC or the FDA. And I've learned to evaluate and trust some of them, what they say. In particular, as I've already mentioned, Aaron Seary, who's a lawyer, Children's Health Defense, which is a website that's come under quite a bit of fire because Robert Kennedy was the founder of that organization, but they are an invaluable source of information about drugs and vaccines in relationship to childhood health. And I recommend that source to everybody. If I had to recommend one book to physicians, it would be Aaron Seary's book called Vaccines, Amen. It's a short book. It's very clear. It's exhaustively referenced. If I had to recommend one good book for parents who are trying to decide what to do for their children, I would recommend a book recently written by, what's his name? It's called Facts. What's his name?
Oh gosh, I forgot.
Gavin DeBecker.
Oh.
No. Gavin DeBecker wrote another book. Oh, Paul Thomas. Paul Thomas, sorry. So those two are invaluable sources of information depending on where you're coming from. As a physician, you're looking at the science. As a parent, you're looking at kind of a bigger picture. What was the rest of the question, Geri?
That was basically the sources that you rely on for information regarding vaccines.
I think I'll leave it at that. You know, I do still read some of the bigger journals, but I don't always trust what they say. And certainly during COVID, they put out some fraudulent studies. So.
I just do have one question. Children's Health Defense, a lot of people say it's biased information. Do you find any of the information coming from Children's Health Defense is biased?
Well, they have a bias, of course.
Yeah.
We all do. I do. I have a bias in favor of medical freedom. I mean, that's who I am. But I find the information, while biased, will present both sides of the question at Children's Health Defense, and you can come to your own conclusions about that. It's well referenced. There are lots of studies that you can link to in their articles. So yes, it's biased in the same way that I am. So I tend to read it. Yeah.
Okay, Allison, do you want to take
Yes.
the last few minutes?
Yes, thank you. So yes, I think just with what Dr. Ryder is saying, that's one of our key goals of being here right now, is we want all this information laid on the table in a way to try to really balance out all sides of the story, which really has just not been the case. And I wanted to, Dr. Ryder mentioned Dr. Marcia Angel, who was the editor-in-chief of the New England Medical Journal. And I do just want to read her quote. I think it's important for us to understand as we think about where are we getting our information, and again, what do we trust and who do we trust? And she said, quote, "It is simply no longer possible to believe much of the clinical research that is published or to rely on the judgment of trusted physicians or authoritative medical guidelines. I take no pleasure in this conclusion, which I reached slowly and reluctantly over my 2 decades as an editor of the New England Journal of Medicine." Dr. Ryder also mentioned Dr. Richard Horton, editor-in-chief of The Lancet, considered to be one of the most well-respected peer-reviewed medical journals in the world. His quote, "The case against science is straightforward. Much of the scientific literature, perhaps half, may simply be untrue. Afflicted by studies with small sample sizes, tiny effects, invalid explanatory analyses, and flagrant conflicts of interest, together with an obsession for pursuing fashionable trends of dubious importance, science has taken a turn towards darkness." Now, I do want to say that obviously science is the quest for truth, and there's many ways to reach that, and there's constant conversations that have to happen, and I think that we all have to remember to humble ourselves to the fact that there's so much that we don't know, there's so much we have left to learn, and we need to keep our minds open, and that's why these conversations are so important. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that when we are talking about vaccine injury and vaccine death, we're talking about people. We're talking about real people. And so I think to start to go down the road of, oh, well, it's just a small percentage of people that are harmed, or it's just a small percentage of people that die, what if that's your child? And this is where I want to bring out the loss of, in my practice, prior to COVID, I worked with around 94 vaccine injured people, and a lot of that was Guillain-Barré, Bell's palsy, some autoimmune conditions. After COVID, that skyrocketed to around 200 vaccine injuries. And in particular, this is really heartbreaking to me. This is a child, a 7-year-old girl from Barton, Vermont. Her name is Kaylin Matten. Her mother's name is Nicole. And she went in for a well check on December 2nd, 2011. And just a bit later, she died from myocarditis because of the vaccine, which is what's reported on her death certificate. She passed away from a Fluzone vaccine, and it had mercury in it. Fluzone did contain mercury at that time. So I think we also have to think about the fact that death and injury from these are real, and this is why we have to go back to as much information and informed consent, and really looking at the process around how and if safety is determined or not. The other piece that I wanted to bring up, just in relation to this question of who do we trust, I think that that's where we also just have to honor each individual. We're obviously very different. We have very different genetic histories. We have very different health conditions. And I see in my practice many, many times people who respond differently to prescription medications. Talking about statins, antidepressants, people have side effects. Some people are absolutely fine. So those are things that we have to keep in mind, that people do respond differently. And there is one case in particular, her name was Hannah Pauling, and in 2000, she, at the age of 18 months, she received 5 vaccines, including MMR, DTaP, so multiple antigens at one time. Her father happened to be John Pauling of the Kennedy Krieger Institute. He was a neurologist. And it came to be through his research in working in conjunction with Dr. Andrew Zimmerman. They published a study on this, that they found that their daughter had mitochondrial dysfunction, and that was where she had the reaction to the vaccine that caused her regressive encephalopathy or autism. And I think that this is where we also need to again remind ourselves that we are all incredibly different. And what they did find out from that research study, which I do have here to share as well, mitochondrial dysfunction, was that this is not rare. It is estimated in further research that this can occur in 20 to 50% of children. So if you're talking about a disorder that puts somebody at risk for having a side effect or a reaction, we need to keep in mind, again, the fact that we are all very different, and we should have access to all of this information in order to make informed decisions.
Thank you, Allison.
I just have a couple of.
Well, you've got 10 minutes, but I just
Oh,
want to
yeah, tell me.
repeat the question and
Okay.
then you can say whatever you want.
And a station
This
ID.
is for Larry and Celeste. What sources do you rely on for information regarding vaccines?
Oh, and a station ID real quick.
Oh, right. This is, thank you, Amy. Amy's on the ball. WMRW LP Warren, 94.5 FM, streaming at WMRW.org. The show is the opinions of its producers and participants. It does not necessarily represent the opinions or views of WMRW and its license holder, Retort. Okay, sorry, do you need me to repeat the question?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
So just a couple comments, the placebo controlled, I can give you a list of the vaccines that have all been tested using placebo, so if you're
So
interested.
there are studies,
Oh, yeah, so there,
yeah,
It's a-
I would
it's a
love
long
that
list.
list.
yeah, it's a long list. So, where do we get information? So, I was just wondering, so the discounting of the quality of information that's coming from traditional sources, like all the medical journals. Essentially what we just heard is that none of the medical journals are producing decent science and should probably be ignored. Okay? Allison, you have a family member who has cancer?
Yes,
Are they using any chemotherapy?
yes, and that's her choice. Again,
Oh, wait,
oh
excuse me.
yes,
No,
that is her choice.
Okay.
Keep in mind. Thank you.
I understand that. Where did the research behind the chemotherapy come from? How did we come up with this drug and decide that it was beneficial? Yes, you can choose whether to use it or not. Absolutely, one should. That's absolute. However, we trust information coming in certain areas much more than others. So when it comes from, so statins, I mean, probably everybody here is on a statin. No? Okay, well, I'm not either. But, good.
No one in
good.
this room is
But
on
there's
the
So there's
Thanks,
a lot
Paula.
there's a lot of stuff that's being studied that we use on a daily basis. So we got recommendations to not smoke, or that secondhand smoking was bad. It pushed people out. They complained like crazy. I remember when seatbelts were being required. Why did we have to wear seatbelts? We had to wear seatbelts not because they were really worried about our health, but when we ended up in the hospital with brain damage from that accident, or we killed somebody else, when we ended up in the hospital, ultimately the government paid for it. Because your insurance runs out, you can't kick somebody out of the hospital with brain damage. So you end up having, it costs the country money, so they made a rule requiring that we have seatbelts. So somebody came up with that, and somehow we believed it. So where did we get information? Well, historically, the information that we got came from the CDC. And the CDC had a committee of people who represented multiple different entities. Mostly they were researchers, but their information, it's like a pyramid. So there were a few people at the top of the pyramid, but where they got their information was from hundreds of individual researchers, from thousands of research papers that were reviewed and looked over and carefully analyzed. And it wasn't just that bad research was being published in the New England Journal. These are papers that were presented in public meetings where people would represent the quality of their research and were being analyzed by people who understood how that worked. So right now, I defer to those entities, those organizations, who I believe have the best interest of the majority of people in mind. And for us, it's the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American College of OBGYN when it comes to women, pregnant women. There's a great source that comes from the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and there's a vaccine researcher, Paul Offit, who is easy to understand, soft-spoken, and very knowledgeable. You gave me a little smile there.
Sorry, go ahead.
So, it's the other issue, just I would, analyzing what considered quality research is really hard. So the paper that was referred to was that paper that wasn't published because the peer review process rejected it.
The paper that you were referring to is the one that Sandy was mentioning in terms of the
The Henry Ford.
Ford
So,
paper.
so that had a zillion patients in it. It was really interesting, but
Are
as
you talking about the paper that the documentary is based
yeah,
on?
yeah,
Okay, and you want to comment on that?
I'm just so as
This
an
is,
example.
Larry's referring to, just so people know, there's a new documentary and it's called An Inconvenient Study. And it's based around this study that Larry's referring to.
So it was the movie was intense. I mean, it was professionally produced. It was very powerful. I mean, I was ready to throw all my vaccines out right after that. It was so well done. The problem was the quality of the research upon which this was based was flawed.
Well, isn't though the Ford Institute one of the top?
They can produce bad research.
Oh.
Wait, I was just told that the
Well,
Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine are both published bad research.
Oh, so just this particular study you
I'm
found?
just focusing on this study, and I'm using it as an example of how what seems to be a really good study by a respected institution can be sufficiently flawed that it leads you into the wrong direction. And as a neonatologist, right, I took care of newborns. And sick newborns, tiny premature babies, the care of this patient population was highly vested in active research. Because think about it, we could barely save a baby when I started who was a few months early. Those babies died. Kennedy, Jackie and Jack Kennedy, huh? And Jack Kennedy had a baby who was born at 35 weeks gestation who died in the hospital. That wasn't that long ago. Now, we have babies who survive 10, 12, 14 weeks earlier. Why? Because we did research, because we published in the New England Journal.
You know, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I hate to cut into your time, but I keep wondering, and I've been wondering this for the longest time, when you said that the study, An Inconvenient Study, the documentary, is flawed, why are there not really great studies studying the unvaccinated compared to the vaccinated? It seems like such a simple thing to do, but there aren't any.
Well, one reason is part of the problem with this study. There are different populations in many ways. So unvaccinated these days may well be people who have done their own research, accessed the internet, read, somehow influenced. They may be people who don't go to the doctor as much because they don't believe in doctors. So they, go ahead. You want to say something?
No, go ahead, I'm sorry. I just, go ahead, Celeste.
I just want to add that I think the point to be made is that, and this was present in the analysis of the Henry Ford study, is that there are confounders when you do population-based studies. There are things that are influencing the population health that are other than what is actually being looked at, and those have to be controlled for. I think that's what Larry was getting at. Is
Yes,
if you,
but why isn't that happening? I mean,
What?
why can't that study be done? And why is it not being done? It seems like,
Because
It would answer
in
the
order to do
question.
it,
Yeah.
you'd have to have a randomized double-blind controlled trial. That's what Kennedy has always said is the gold standard for research. So you would have to start now, a couple of reasons though. You'd have to start now saying, okay,
but
Well-
wait 1 second, this isn't a trial, it's a study. So
it's
you're
a
studying
retrospective,
people who,
it's a retrospective analysis of patients who either were vaccinated or not vaccinated.
yeah, but there would be no placebo involved, I mean, you have to,
Right, so
we're
but that, but
talking about a
nevertheless,
trial.
that's the randomized controlled trial that Kennedy refers to as being the gold standard.
Yeah, but I'm talking about a study, like,
Well, these are all studies, these are different types of studies. See, this is the dilemma that
So-
I have, as well as most people. It's really hard to figure out how to do good research. And also, it's really hard to figure out how to analyze the research that has been done. And what seems to be, like the movie, seems to be great on the surface, when you really dig down and analyze the methods and the patient populations, you realize it really didn't prove what it was trying to prove. You still want to say
but
something?
I guess it's my same thing with VAERS. They say VAERS is broken, why don't they fix it? if that study you're saying isn't good, why isn't there a good one? There should be. It seems to me and I'm at ground zero when it comes to medical. That's why I have all you guys here. But it just seems to me like a common sense thing. You could take unvaccinated people, compare them to vaccinated people, and see which ones are sicker. And you could put in all the confounders and everything that you would do for a study, and come out with a result. And
Maybe.
that doesn't exist.
Well, wait. It maybe. I mean,
So, I think your goal is laudable, and there has to be a driving interest in doing that. It's not an easy
Yes.
study to do.
Or
It takes time and money, and we know that money is, for research is less and less, not more and more. And it's just not a simple a study to do in terms of following different populations and making sure you have all your confounders.
yeah, and I would
And
expand,
we're at 10 minutes, but let's give you guys an extra minute.
I
'cause we
would
kept
expand on
interrupting.
that just one more second, which
Yeah,
is,
go ahead.
yes, that study should be done. Okay?
Exactly,
Yes,
absolutely.
it should be done. So I don't mean to go in that direction and say, okay, it's finished, we can't say anything more. Yes, it should be done.
So.
What we should do is commit the federal government, which is a little bit more independent than a pharmaceutical company, to put money into doing that research. Because it's not easy, and it would take thousands and thousands of patients that were followed. We're not a good country to do that, because we have such a diffuse healthcare system. We lose track of patients. That's why much of the good research on the outcomes of children as a result of early events is done in Europe, where they have universal health care, and they can follow these kids from birth to death. So we know a lot more.
okay, well, thank you, Celeste and Larry, and I'm up to my fourth question, which you guys go first. So it is, what role should informed consent play with regard to vaccines? And this is Larry, and Celeste will chime in.
So I think informed consent, what role should it play? It should continue to play a very important role. It should be guaranteed. Informed consent is the goal when you're discussing medical care with your patients or your families. And there are aids that that are available. Again, these are through the CDC originally, and now they're available also through other organizations. These are tools that physicians can use to share with their families in order to make them aware of what the benefits as well as some of the risks are related to vaccines. So the informed consent is part of the process. It's required by law in many states, and I think it's only moral and ethically correct to be able to have that discussion with families and patients.
The problem and the challenge is that we need good information to give to families so that they can have the ability to make an informed decision. So how does the provider decide what's good quality information? So as an example, anecdotal reports of adverse events that haven't been analyzed or reviewed and as examples of injury from a vaccine, that's just not something we can trust. You can't say,
Why?
well, because you can't tell stories, because that's not the way healthcare is done. We're not done on the basis of anecdotes. It's done on the basis of reviewed, careful study and analysis. And that's the way you would want us to practice. Oh yeah, I had a patient who looked like you and they had a brain tumor, so I'm gonna bring you in for brain surgery. No, you've gotta be able to do the tests, know what the symptoms are, do a careful analysis before you decide you've got a brain tumor, I'm gonna send you in for brain surgery.
And I think maybe this is a good good place to talk about the safety system that we have in place to monitor vaccine safety. There are opportunities in the VAERS system for anybody to make a report of anything that they believe might be secondary to a vaccine. That information is then analyzed and in order to make a determination of what to differentiate between what is a coincidental association between a condition and a vaccine and a causal association. And that there are different mechanisms for doing that in population studies, and that's what the other safety systems for vaccines rely on in terms of looking for, as an example, signals in the VAERS data. When is something there that shows up in relationship to a vaccine being given that is much higher incidence than it would be in the normal population. So, and then that is examined more closely within these safety systems to determine whether there is a reason to believe that there is a causal effect of the vaccine on the particular condition.
Do we have,
We're almost at 5 minutes for these.
I did have one question, I don't know.
Yeah, go for it.
I was wondering if you have any comment about, there was a $2 million grant given to Harvard to automate the VAERS system, to come up with an automated program that would make the VAERS system much more reliable and dependable and accurate. And they did this, they completed the project and they had the system ready to go, and the CDC, this was, I don't know how many years ago it was.
2009.
Sandy went to Harvard, so maybe you know, 2009. And the system is sitting there and they're not using it. Do you have any idea why?
I don't.
Yeah,
I never heard that.
yeah. Okay, thank you, Larry and Celeste. And so now Sandy and Allison, same question. What role should informed consent play with regard to vaccines?
Just regarding that study that you just mentioned, just regarding the study you mentioned, it was done by Harvard Pilgrim, and as you say, automated the reporting system to pick up as many adverse reactions as possible, and it picked up so many, and that was kind of damaging to the reputation of vaccines being safe and effective at the CDC. Rather than continuing the study, which Harvard Pilgrim wanted to do, just stopped communicating. There was no explanation, no reason. They just shut it down immediately, and that's the way it's been ever since. So, just to say that. But
I just want to interject that was kind of an unfair question because I didn't give that to you ahead of time, and I don't expect you to have that data right on the tip of your fingers. But when I read about it, I was curious. I just read about it this morning before the show, and I was just curious why they would do that. So.
And in the process of, at about the same time, they did perform a study to ascertain how many adverse events were reported to VAERS and how many weren't. And they decided, based on their study, that less than 1% of adverse reactions are ever reported. So you could theoretically, I don't think suggest this, you could multiply anything in VAERS by 100 to get a more accurate number. A lot of people have criticized VAERS during COVID for the same reason, that people can anybody can report. It is a passive system. It's not designed to detect causality, but designed to detect signals or correlations that don't necessarily mean cause. But I can tell you, and this goes back to my trusting patients, that when 5,500 people claim that this vaccine or that vaccine caused my child's autism with rapid regression temporarily related to the vaccine, that becomes more than an anecdote, in my opinion. It becomes reliable data. now back to the question that you asked.
Do you want me to read it again?
And no, it's
Okay.
about the role of informed consent.
Correct.
And informed consent, you know, there are a couple of basic medical ethics that I think all of us agree to in medicine. One is do no harm, which means you don't kill or injure people knowingly. And the other is the practice of informed consent, which originated in 1947, called the Nuremberg Code, which states that people need to be advised of all the benefits, risks, and alternative treatments or alternative options for any experimental vaccine. COVID is certainly experimental, and I would consider, because none of the vaccines in the childhood schedule have really been tested for safety in an adequate way, and I know that's controversial, that you don't agree with that, but I think that's what it is. That the childhood schedule is, in a sense, an experiment on children. Sorry. Yeah, that keeps coming out.
Yeah, I can tell
And
you're
so
fading.
informed consent should be given, and I agree that it's a fundamental ethics principle that you mentioned, Celeste, but if you go to the CDC website, it will say that the information given to patients by law, the vaccine information statements, are not informed consent. And if reading the vaccine information statements, they overemphasize the benefits and underemphasize the risks, in my, just let me finish.
Yeah.
So,
You're halfway.
I'm halfway, okay.
You wanna keep going?
No, go ahead.
You sure?
Yeah.
Keep going.
So it could be provided, and so the question is, what information do you actually provide if it's not a vaccine information statement, which is not by definition, according to the CDC, informed consent.
Correct.
And so the nearest we can get, and Larry, as I agree with you, information is always incomplete. So you don't really know, but you have to take the best information available. And the best information available is on the vaccine package insert, and particularly in section 6.1, which contains the pre-licensure information used to get the FDA to approve a vaccine. And then the post-licensure studies are really the responsibility of the CDC to monitor for safety after the vaccine's on the market. And that's where, if you read section 6.2, all the adverse events are reported without any indication about how common or uncommon or how severe. Once, of course, death is death. But by law, those statements in section 6.2 describing the adverse events, which range from death, paralysis, encephalopathy, transverse myelitis, autoimmune disease, very severe disabling conditions, are required to be felt to be causal by the drug manufacturer, not correlated, specifically to be causal. But there's no data to give you an idea about how common they are. So I think the vaccine, we had a bill in the Vermont legislature some years ago, which never got taken up. None of our bills ever are in the state. But to require that patients receive, could be digital, copies of each vaccine insert for each vaccine, and that when they come into the office, they've already read it and they can ask their physician about it. I think that would be a much more complete and fair way of administering informed consent. Okay, Allison.
And I'll just
30 seconds.
take a moment, thank you, just to wrap up one thought. I think that this conversation in particular sort of drives home the fact that we just absolutely cannot mandate these products on people when we're acknowledging the fact that there is risk and there is harm that's been documented. So we have to look at this benefit risk analysis, and that's where when you go back to even Celeste, when I heard you say about informed consent is ethical and moral, and that's where we also have to keep in mind the fact that mandates then by direct route would not be ethical and moral, and that's why we have to allow people to make these decisions with informed consent. Thank you.
Do we have any time left?
No, but I have the next
Oh, okay.
question that goes
Go
to
ahead.
you.
Go ahead.
Do you want to take a minute?
No, that's all right.
Okay, next question will be Sandy first. Should doctors and drug companies be liable in court if a vaccine causes severe injury or death?
Well, that goes back to what Allison was just saying, that people need to be able to choose according to the best information available. And frankly, if people had true informed consent and there was no liability immunity on the part of the drug companies, all of this controversy would go away, and the government would have to persuade parents, if they're involved in this decision, on the merits of the vaccine, period. And if they can't persuade them, that's the end of it. The patient needs to be able to decide. And yes, so if the liability protection was removed, I think really this would all be sorted out in due time. So that's my short, sweet answer.
Allison, do you have anything to add? Thank you, Sandy.
Can you just repeat the question? I know I had a few thoughts,
Sure.
but I just want to make sure I hit it.
Should doctors and drug companies be liable in court if a vaccine causes severe injury or death?
Drug companies, absolutely, 100%. They are responsible for the safety of their products. They should be responsible, just like any other manufacturer, for making the safest product that they possibly can. And obviously with vaccines and the vaccine court and the amount of money that have been paid out, we know that there is compromise there, and we know that there is true risk. And that's where I also just want to go back to just a few pieces. Just in thinking about historically, I think that it's important for people to recognize Edward Koss, for example, in 1971, he was the president of the Royal Society of Infectious Disease. He did a speech, and in that, he looked at and he used graphs going through these infectious diseases and their high points, and when they dropped off, and when actually vaccines or medical intervention were introduced. And in particular, I just want to point out measles. Measles is obviously very high around 1900s, and then seeing it gradually drop down with public health measures. It wasn't until 1962 where the measles vaccine was introduced, but measles had already dropped to a 1% standpoint from where its highest level was. And so I think we also need to look at what really is, and this is coming a lot also from a nutrition standpoint, what really is driving health, and where does infectious disease come from, and what are the other ways that we can try to approach helping people to be healthy and not have to deal with these infectious disease epidemics. And historically, when you go back and you look at public health measures, you can see clean water, dealing with waste, making sure there's proper waste treatment, making sure that there's hygiene, nutrition. All of these things need to be looked at and assessed when you're looking at true public health measures and the impact that they have had on reducing infectious disease. And there's a lot of research. I've mentioned Edward Koss, but there's a lot that really does look into this. And the other sort of last piece I would say, and this just goes back to, I think, one of the key points is the pharmaceutical industries have protected themselves tremendously with any liability with these vaccine products. So yes, we need to remove the liability shield, but we also have to look at the PrEP Act. And the PrEP Act since 2004 also...
Can you say what the PrEP Act is?
Oh yeah, so the PrEP Act is what offers a liability, full protection during any sort of pandemic or emergency for any countermeasures or medical products. So meaning manufacturers, pharmaceutical industries, doctors, nurses, nobody is liable. And we had a situation here in Vermont during COVID when there was a child in grade school who was vaccinated at the school against her parents' wishes, even though her parents had signed a form and said they didn't want her vaccinated, and they couldn't do anything. They tried to sue, they tried to get a lawsuit going, but they couldn't do anything because the PrEP Act protected everyone from liability. So I think we need to also revisit and make sure that people are responsible for the safety of their products, yes.
Thank you, Allison. Yeah,
I trimmed it just because I can see we're getting close to the time, so I'm gonna give them the fair amount to make sure we
We'll
can.
stretch it to the max. Go ahead, Cindy. Okay.
Oh, I just want to briefly make clear that all infectious diseases had decreased, as Allison mentioned, like measles. The mortality from measles had come down before the vaccine was introduced, 98 to 99%. Likewise in Europe. didn't mean that measles went away, but deaths and complications from measles were vastly decreased without vaccines. And that was true for many other infectious diseases.
Okay.
Perfect.
Same question to Larry and Celeste. Should doctors and drug companies be liable in court if a vaccine causes severe injury or death? I just want to mention, when you guys finish, hopefully we'll have time just for a final thought from all of you, but
So we talked about the liability restrictions essentially against pharmaceutical companies that manufacture vaccines. That was a point at which there were fewer and fewer manufacturers who were willing to make vaccines. Vaccines are not the most profitable of the things that pharmaceutical companies make. They're given several times in an individual's lifetime, as compared to another drug, for instance, that would be taken twice a day for 30 years. They like those drugs. They make much more money on those. So the pharmaceutical industry was not particularly interested in continuing to produce vaccine if the end result was going to be they're going to get sued like crazy. Now it turns out the first
Let-
wait, if the product is safe and effective, why would they get sued?
well, because we don't do great research. So for instance, this started with the DPT, and the whole cell pertussis was thought to be associated with brain damage, permanent brain damage. And there were a zillion lawsuits that came out. It took 10 years to finally determine that it was not associated with it. But in the interim, those who manufactured the vaccine said, screw this, I'm not making enough money on this to deal with these lawsuits. So they stopped, cut back, and stopped manufacturing it. So, but subsequently, it's been shown to not cause permanent brain damage. Another example would be mercury. And there is no mercury in vaccines anymore. But mercury,
But
we know
why? Why is there no mercury in vaccines?
because of public concerns,
Yeah.
not because of risk. There was no evidence of risk ever shown.
Mercury. Oh, really? I didn't
No,
know.
mercury is bad, don't get me wrong.
The right kind of mercury.
But this is a different type of mercury that's in vaccines, and the amount was so small that it was never able to show any demonstrable adverse effects of this type of mercury. Now let's just
I
make
encourage people to look into that,
Okay.
sorry.
yeah. So let's just make a comment about money and about nutrition. So there's a lot of things that's been going on in our country in the last several decades. How many of those things are causing us and our children to be sick? So nutrition. I think that's great. We should definitely provide better nutrition. So how do we provide better nutrition to our inner city? How do we provide better nutrition to those who can only get food at their local bodega? We need to provide better nutrition, no question about it. So I completely agree. Whether that alone will help prevent infectious diseases, I don't know. But I certainly know that being healthier will help you deal with any problem. So being healthier also includes nutrition. How about things that are in the air? You know, solar panels don't make a lot of pollutants, but coal-fired power plants do. So what's in our air? What's in our water? What are environmental toxins that we're exposed to? And how much does that affect us? So here's the dilemma. All those are, I think, important questions which are not answered, but suspicious. So in order to do that, we need to put money into doing that research. We need to do it well. We can't just say, oh yeah, probably it is, so let's just not do that. We need to understand really where it's coming from.
Would you include vaccine research?
Oh yeah, everything. So,
Okay, good.
so the issue is money. So, and I think you guys will agree with me on this. I've always saw American healthcare as a mechanism by which people can make money, as opposed to a goal to make people well or keep them from getting sick. All right? If you think of it as how are they making money on this, which you guys clearly see on one level, then it's easy to see why things are done the way they are. Look at our local clinic and what's happened there. So I agree with you that we need to understand that. But the solution is not to discount all this, but to say, let's support federal, unbiased support for good quality research. So that study that you want to do will have money to do it. I think that's the way to do it.
And 1 minute left if you want.
Unless,
Agree. So I think the question was about liability, is that
Yeah,
correct?
should doctors and drug companies be liable in court if a vaccine causes a severe injury or death?
So I think there is already a way that physicians are liable for anything, and that's our malpractice system, however flawed it may be. And one of
Does
the,
that apply to vaccines too? I don't know.
it applies to anything.
Anything.
Anybody can bring a case about anything at any time. It's,
Yes,
and
that's true.
but that, even that is a flawed system, and I'd much rather use a system where you have a committee of experts, such as are at the CDC, looking at, in this case, vaccine safety. I'd rather have that than have it be, tried, be charged in a system of malpractice that we have now in the United States, which does not rely on experts and does not allow for, it actually biases and makes it much more likely that there'll be uninformed information used in the liability suit. So yes, I think if physicians are have made errors, then yes, they should be charged. They should be liable for whether that's a court case or something else.
And drug companies as well, pharmaceutical companies.
And drug companies, yes, however, I think that we have to be careful to balance out the system so that we don't take away the good part in our efforts to prevent any bad part. I think we really need to make efforts to do that. I did want to go back and just make a comment about informed consent, if I could do that.
Yeah, you have a few more
Yeah,
minutes.
we're up on time, but you're probably owed some because you've been interrupted.
So this won't take long. I didn't mean to imply from my statements when I said that the VISs, the vaccine information sheets, are tools that using the information sheets solely would suffice for informed consent. They are indeed a tool in the toolbox, but and they should be given, and it's optimal to give those vaccine information sheets to the parents and the families prior to somebody walking in and saying, we're giving your children these vaccines today. That's where the importance of the discussion with your pediatrician or your physician comes in, using the vaccine information sheets and the limited information that's on there to start the discussion. I could say that even before COVID, I was seeing in my practice with the availability of internet, many more parents coming in and families coming in and having a much more detailed discussion about the benefits and the risks of vaccines. As a pediatrician, I had to honor that and if I didn't understand what they were asking me, I had to educate myself and come back to that conversation with the family, not turn them away or turn them off. That's what I mean by the ethical practice of informed consent.
And
It
then-
certainly involves more than vaccine information sheets.
And then the family would have the right to refuse.
Yes,
Okay, great.
Of course.
Oh, good.
and just,
I don't know how that ties in with mandates, but,
Well, mandates are on a public health level, and I would certainly counsel the family that would be one of the possible side effects of them not choosing to vaccinate their child.
well, thank you,
I-
Celeste.
and there is still, the drug companies still do have some liability if they made an error or they had a problem with the way they manufactured a product and there was an adverse result from that. there's still civil suits. You can look it up. I mean,
Well,
the vaccine injury is one thing, but there's still civil suits that are possible.
Okay, we have about 2 minutes each. We have about 2 minutes each for you guys to give a final, whatever you want to say.
Okay,
So,
just
Sandy, we'll start with you.
to respond to that, Larry, is that in 2012, the Supreme Court ruled in a case Brucewitz versus Wyeth, the drug companies were under no obligation to make vaccines safer. None. They are unavoidably unsafe. So, but my plea for this is just so people, as I said at the beginning, start to think instead of believe everything. It's like we've been in an echo chamber of vaccines are safe and effective all our life, and mine included. So I encourage people to look at the data, do their own investigation as best they can, and make their own choice. Mandates are not compatible with are incompatible with informed consent. And 2 states now, Idaho has just recently passed a medical freedom bill where there's no mandate whatsoever, even for a child to attend school. And I think Florida is fast approaching the same place. We'll see how far this goes. And I hope before I'm dead that it comes to Vermont.
So could I just, I'm sorry, I just wanted to barge in.
Go
here.
ahead. I'll
So
make you
that's,
next.
so my worry about when that situation comes to pass where there are no mandates,
I know what you're going to
Is-
say,
what am I gonna say?
that all these diseases are going to come back.
No, that's not what I was gonna say.
Okay.
What I was gonna
Sorry.
say is, then let's talk about liability. So then, when the child who has leukemia is exposed to someone who is contagious with measles, and that child dies, should that child's family have the ability to sue the other family because that family decision resulted in the death of their child? This is just,
Would you like
this
to
is
answer that,
in one
Sandy?
sense a rhetorical question, but this is what I worry about, is we're gonna go, it opens up a number of liability issues there. And I am very concerned about that in terms of how we manage this, because as we've all evidenced here today, the liability issues around medical practice and vaccines are fraught. I mean, they're just very difficult questions.
They are.
Yeah, sorry.
And
No, that's okay.
again, I just want to say this would all be sorted out in the courts, and it won't be easy. And in terms of protecting the immunocompromised, I would rather have my immunocompromised child around a healthy, unvaccinated person than a person who's chronically ill and is probably more likely to transmit illness to them. So that's my response to that.
Okay,
And-
go ahead,
And
Celeste.
that obviously would be, as a parent, your personal response as well.
Well,
So-
it's my medical opinion.
Okay,
It's my medical opinion. So.
okay.
Okay, Celeste, do you want to say anything else before we wrap up? We'll start with you and then go to Larry.
I think I would like to say thanks so much for having us. It's in this kind of a conversation, it's difficult to have little blocks of time, but I do enjoy having the individual topics, honing in on some of these individual aspects of vaccine, and having more of a back and forth conversation.
Couldn't
So
agree
that,
more.
yeah, it would be great to do that. I do agree that this area of health vaccines really, there's a lot of information out there, and I would just advocate for families to be educated and also to continue to discuss their concerns and their questions with their primary physician, and hopefully they have one to do that with.
Well, thank you, Celeste. That was Celeste Madden, and she is a pediatrician. And next, Larry, do you want to take a minute or two and
Yeah, just briefly. So,
final thought?
first of all, I want to thank you guys also. It started, Geri, when we were conversing electronically, and you gave me a bunch of references. It was very insightful. It really helped. And these conversations now further help. So I have to say, I don't know that I've been convinced to be an anti-vaxxer, but I do
We're working on it.
but I do like the concepts, and I like to think about it, and I want to maintain an open mind. So I'm definitely going to keep my ears open more. I'm going to try to drill down into things that maybe that I don't agree with or weren't how I was trained, and say, okay, no, just because I wasn't trained that way doesn't mean it's not valid. So I'm going to have to start thinking a little bit more deeply when I hear concerns that are raised that may not necessarily be exactly the way I saw it. So for that, I thank you both. I think there's going to be a reckoning sooner rather than later. I mean, we have 35 cases of pertussis in the state, all amongst or under-vaccinated people. Did you know about that?
I did not know
Yeah.
that.
So whooping cough is back in the state. Measles is obviously out in the Southwest. It has definitely gone down with better nutrition and better healthcare, but it's still there and it's still potentially lethal. So we'll see. I mean, when it happens to a cluster of a few hundred people, we're not going to necessarily see the bad outcomes. When it runs into the thousands, we may start seeing it. We'll see. I mean, if I'm wrong, that'll be great.
But thank you, Larry.
A topic for another day, for
Yeah.
sure.
Larry
Yeah, thank you.
Constantine, and he is also a pediatrician, and for purposes of full disclosure, Larry and Celeste are married. And I want to thank you both for taking the time for this conversation, and I agree with you both. It's really the way we should proceed with these kinds of issues. Okay, Allison, do you want to go next?
I just
Couple of
wanted
minutes?
just to wrap up real quick, and I'm definitely on the same page. I really appreciate this conversation. I think it is absolutely the most important thing we could be doing in our communities with our friends and our family right now, is really just putting it all on the table and being honest and transparent. I do want to also just respond to what Larry said about pertussis, and there's studies definitely that show that pertussis vaccines absolutely are not stopping any sort of transmission. You do not get mucosal antibodies with a pertussis vaccine. So I think that, again, this just is an example of what we all need to sort of dig in and dive into a little bit more. And one of the things in the book that Sandy recommended, Vaccines, Amen, by Aaron Seary, that he talks about is we have to make sure that we're not just saying slogans, saying vaccines are safe and effective, vaccines save lives. We really need to get beyond the belief and dig into the science and the information, and really, because this is our children that we're talking about. So we want to make sure that we are making good informed decisions for our children, because we all care about the health of each other and our families. And that's where I would just go back to my last and final thought is, when it comes to body autonomy and informed consent, this is a fundamental human right. And I think we need to make sure that we all move forward on a path where we are respecting people's decisions around around vaccines and healthcare in general. We have to make sure that everybody is honoring the fact that we're individuals and we're different, and we are allowed to make these personal, private healthcare decisions with our providers. Thank you.
Allison. That was Allison Despathy, who's a nutritionist with a practice in St. Johnsbury, and she has a master's in
Clinical nutrition.
clinical nutrition. Thank you, Allison, so much for being here. And Sandy, final word?
I
thought
I
think
already
he-
did my final
Did you?
word.
Well, we'll have a final word again, I guess. I was gonna go around and do final words for everyone, so you get another chance.
As a kind of follow-up to this discussion, just sort of opens things up a little bit. I think if there are many questions out there, it's kind of a superficial take on a lot of stuff, that we're going to sponsor several, or at least one, maybe I should say several, public discussions where people can come and ask questions about the pros and cons and try and make up their decisions as best they can.
Thank you,
for-
Sandy.
For further information on that, I would just encourage people to look at Vermont Stands Up or Vermont Health Choice Vermont if you're interested in taking part or attending any of these conversations as we go around to try to continue what we're talking about here. It's important.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it is. Well, thank you all. I think this conversation was superb, and I really appreciate the time you all took to come and talk.
Thank you.
And thanks everybody for listening. Gary's probably out there somewhere chomping at the bit to get in. He does a great show called Weekend Warm Up with great music. And I'm going to turn you over to Hal for a few minutes. Have a great weekend and happy Thanksgiving. I will not be here next Friday. I'm trying to get a cue from Amy if she will be.
Oh, yes.
Okay, next Friday.
Yes, 2
The
guests maybe.
28th. Amy will be here. So thank you all and have a great weekend. And I'll see you in a couple of weeks.